The death penalty is the highest possible punishment you can receive because you can't survive it, or so you would think. But there are criminals who have miraculously survived the death penalty. In today's video, we bring you the most incredible cases of criminals who were not harmed by rope, syringes, or bullets. We begin our video with Ginu Lurer. The woman with the hard-to-pronounce name was involved in the kidnapping of a child and a murder plot in Thailand in 1978, for which she was sentenced to death by gunshot. The 51-year-old buried her victim in a celebratory ritual so that she would not be haunted by his ghost later. Nevertheless, she was arrested by the police. After the criminal was executed by a firing squad, her body was taken to a morgue, and there the miracle happened. The 51-year-old woman started screaming in the morgue and even stood up. As it turned out, she had been saved by a physical anomaly called situs inversus. With this anomaly, the organs are inversed inside the body and so were not hit by the targeted shots. In the end, however, this didn't do the criminal much good, as the woman who caused a huge media frenzy because of the incident was brought before the executioner again shortly afterward. The next criminal in our video managed to live for over a year after the death penalty. But first things first, in 1944, 16-year-old Willie Francis went after his boss in the US state of Louisiana and was caught shortly afterwards with his wallet in his pocket. The teenager was sentenced in court to death by electric chair for his crime, which is a very successful method of execution, but not for Willie Francis. After turning on the power to the electric chair, he didn't die, but instead screamed for his hood to be removed so he could breathe. The man who had prepared the electric chair was so drunk that he had connected some wires incorrectly. After the failed attempt, a lawyer who felt the teenager's execution was unduly harsh tried to prevent a second attempt. Although serious doubts about the 16-year-old's guilt emerged in the meantime, a new date was set, and just over a year later, the electric shock was powerful enough to end Willie Francis's life. By the way, what is your opinion on the death penalty? We continue with the incredible case of Doyle Lee Ham, who grew up as a criminal from an early age. He grew up in rural Alabama, USA, and his criminal family made it clear to him early on that he wasn't a real ham if he didn't go out and steal from people. After several burglaries, assaults, and thefts, he finally killed a man at the age of 30 so he could steal $350 from him. In 1987, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Doyle Lee Ham then spent 3 full decades on death row until he finally received the death penalty. Because of his cancer, however, it was not possible to successfully carry out the procedure, as is customary for this method of execution. Doctors spent 2 long hours trying to use needles and find a suitable vein. In the end, the execution, which the criminal himself desperately wanted at this point, had to be called off, and all other attempts had to be cancelled because they were considered inhumane. Doyle Lee Ham died of cancer in prison 4 years later. The next criminal on our list not only survived the death penalty once, but actually 3 times. 20-year-old Englishman John Babacom Lee was accused of murder in 1884 and eventually sentenced to death by hanging. However, after the rope was placed around his neck, the trapdoor underneath him did not open properly, so the Englishman survived the death penalty. After the executioners made 2 more attempts and both failed for the same reason, the judge ruled that the death sentence should be commuted to life imprisonment. We continue with a particularly harsh form of punishment that is much more severe than those mentioned so far. This is stoning, an ancient practice that is still used today in some countries. In 1997, Zolika Kadkoda, then 20 years old, was sentenced to death by stoning in Iran for having an extramarital affair, which is a criminal offense there. She was buried up to her waist in the sand and then stoned until she was declared dead. After the young woman was taken to a morgue, it was surprisingly discovered that she was still alive. Fortunately for her, she was then taken to a hospital, and the village elders, who had sentenced her to death, promised that she would be forgiven if she survived. Indeed, the young woman recovered, and as the case caused an international outcry, all charges against her were dropped. She was acquitted and is still alive today. If you're wondering why this man looks so disfigured, you need to hear his incredible story. Mexican soldier Wenceslao Moguel was sentenced to death by gunshot during the Mexican Revolution in 1915. He was shot not just once or twice, but 8 times. While on the ground, he was also shot in the head to ensure that he was guaranteed to be dead. But Wenceslao Mokwel was not dead. In fact, when he was found the next day among his dead comrades, it was found that he was still breathing. After a long and painful period of healing, the soldier, who was 25 years old at the time of his execution, lived to the age of 86, and thanks to his incredible luck, became a popular guest on radio shows telling his story. The 37-year-old Iranian Alizera was also very lucky, if you want to call it that. In 2013, the man was caught with an entire kilogram of drugs. In Iran, this is punishable by death. And so the 37-year-old was hanged, and after hanging from a rope for 12 minutes, was finally pronounced dead. However, when he miraculously woke up in the morgue and then recovered in hospital, he had no reason to be happy. The law in Iran stipulates that the death penalty can only be carried out on people who are conscious and in relatively good health. Simply put, the doctors treated Alizera in hospital only to get him back to health so that he would be ready for another attempted execution. However, after the case caused a huge international furor and numerous human rights organizations intervened, the Iranian Minister of Justice decided that the man should not be executed after all. Instead, the criminal must now serve a life sentence. The last criminal on our list goes above and beyond when it comes to surviving the death penalty. The case of American Ramel Broom, who was sentenced to death for several horrific crimes, attracted international attention because his execution by lethal injection failed 18 times in 2009. Ramel Broom was never found to have a vein in his body suitable for injecting the poison. The criminal even wanted to help the execution staff execute him and showed them various parts of his body that he thought were suitable. However, after none of the attempts worked, his execution was repeatedly postponed until it was finally set for the 17th of June 2020. However, Ramel Broom died of coronavirus 2 months earlier. That was our video about 8 real criminals who survived the death penalty. Subscribe to our channel if you found it interesting, and see you next time here at Wisefool.